The internet feels wireless. You send a message, it arrives in seconds. You move money across an ocean in the time it takes to blink. You watch a video stream from a server on the other side of the planet, and it barely buffers. The whole thing seems to float, invisible, instant, everywhere. It doesn't float. America's connection to the rest of the world is physical. It runs through cables, glass fiber cables, bundled inside layers of copper and steel that lie on the floor of the ocean. They cross the Atlantic, they cross the Pacific, they run down the Red Sea and around the Cape of Good Hope. They come ashore at quiet little buildings tucked behind chain-link fences on beaches in Florida, New York, California. Subsea cables carry about 99% of intercontinental data traffic. Not the internet as a whole, your neighbor's Netflix, your city's traffic cameras, those run on domestic infrastructure. But intercontinental, messages between continents, payments between banks, calls between governments. 99% of that crosses the ocean floor, and it breaks, more often than you'd think. The story of these cables isn't just how much we depend on them, it's the story of why, despite that dependence, the system keeps working. Picture the cable itself. At the deepest part of the ocean, it's about as thick as a garden hose. A core of glass fibers thinner than a human hair, surrounded by a copper power conductor that keeps the signal amplifiers running along the route. Steel wire armor around that. A polyethylene jacket over everything. In shallow coastal water, where anchors drag and fishing gear catches, the cable gets additional steel wrapping. It looks more like a small industrial rope than a communications line. The cables don't float. They rest on the seabed, mostly just lying there, running for thousands of kilometers across terrain that no human has seen. Abyssal plains, mid-ocean ridges, the walls of underwater canyons. At each end, the cable comes up through the seafloor, angles toward shore, and eventually surfaces at a beach manhole. A small concrete vault, usually unremarkable, sitting somewhere along a coastline. From there it connects to a landing station, a building that looks like nothing special from the street, where the submarine system hands off to the land network. Academic sourcing puts the range of intercontinental traffic carried by these cables at 95 to 99%. The reason satellites haven't replaced them is simple. Fiber capacity costs approximately 2,800 times less per unit than satellite capacity. Satellites are fast enough for plenty of things, but when a bank in New York needs to settle a transaction with a bank in London, it's not going to use a satellite link when a fiber cable sitting on the ocean floor is available for a fraction of the cost. The global network is enormous, hundreds of cable systems. The total length of deployed cable runs into the millions of kilometers. And it's still growing. New cables are laid every year by consortiums of tech companies and telecoms that need more capacity between continents. Subsea cables come ashore across the continental United States, on both coasts, spread across multiple states, and connected to different parts of the country's inland network. That geographic spread is not an accident, it's a feature. More on that in a moment. Every submarine cable that lands in the United States requires a federal license. The legal basis goes back to the Cable Landing License Act of 1921, a law passed when submarine telegraph cables were still the cutting edge of international communication. Today, the FCC administers that licensing authority under an executive order that's been on the books for decades. Any company that wants to bring a cable ashore here has to apply, disclose its ownership, and get approval. When a foreign government or company has a stake in the ownership, there's an additional layer of review. It's handled by a body called Team Telecom, formerly the Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the U.S. Telecommunications Services Sector, formalized by executive order in 2020. Team Telecom reviews the national security implications of who controls a cable landing in the United States
before the FCC grants a license. That review process matters because of what rides on these cables.
Financial transactions, government communications, military logistics. The kind of traffic that, if it were disrupted or compromised, wouldn't just slow down someone's video call. Most of the cables themselves are privately owned, by telecommunications companies, by consortiums of tech giants who built their own transoceanic links because they needed the capacity. The government doesn't build the cables, it licenses them, reviews the ownership, and tries to make sure the network as a whole is resilient. Here's what actually damages undersea cables, and it's almost never what you'd imagine. The International Cable Protection Committee, the ICPC, the industry body that tracks this, reports approximately 150 to 200 submarine telecommunications cable faults worldwide every year. That's a consistent figure across multiple years of their data. What causes them? Roughly 70 to 80% of global cable damage comes from accidental human activity. Fishing gear is the leading cause. Bottom contact trawling drags heavy equipment across the seabed, and cables get caught. Vessel anchors are the other major factor. A ship drops anchor in the wrong place or drags during a storm, and a cable on the seafloor gets snagged, stretched, or severed. Natural hazards, earthquakes and underwater landslides, account for around 10% of faults. The ocean floor isn't static. Sediment shifts. Fault lines move. A seismic event can bury or snap a cable that was laid in what appeared to be stable ground. Equipment failure and other causes make up the rest. The word fault is important here. A fault is a break or a degradation on one cable, one link in the network. It is not, in most cases, a communications outage. Understanding the difference between a fault and an outage is the key to understanding why this system works the way it does. There's also good news embedded in the long-term data. The rate of shallow water fishing and anchor faults has come down significantly. ICPC data shows that rate fell from roughly 0.2 faults per 1,000 kilometers in 2010 to about 0.05 in 2018. The industry has gotten better at protecting cables in the zones where they're most vulnerable. Most people who use the internet every day have no idea that cables break this often. And the reason they don't know is that most of the time, a cable fault doesn't affect them at all. Traffic reroutes, other cables absorb the load. The system compensates. This is redundancy, and it's built into the architecture at every level. The continental United States, with landing points spread across both coasts and multiple states, is relatively well protected against a major outage. A single incident at one location would have to knock out an enormous number of diverse, geographically separated landings before it could meaningfully impair connectivity. The risk that any single event could wipe out access is dramatically reduced by that diversity. There's a real-world example of this at corridor scale. In early 2024, 3 cable systems in the Red Sea were damaged within a short period. 3 cables in one of the world's most important transit corridors. And yet, of roughly 14 cable routes through that corridor, 11 remained operational. Traffic rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope and eastward through Asia-Pacific links. There was congestion, latency increased on some routes. But the world's internet did not stop. This is the vocabulary the rest of this video depends on. A fault on one cable is not a rerouting event. A rerouting event does not mean degraded service. Degraded service in one region is not a regional outage. A regional outage is not a nationwide outage. These are different things, and conflating them is how cable coverage goes wrong. The system usually survives a fault because it was designed with the assumption that cables would fail. Redundancy buys time. It doesn't eliminate the problem. When a cable fault occurs, someone has to fix it, and fixing a submarine cable is one of the slowest, most logistically complicated repair jobs in the world. It starts before the ship even leaves port. After a fault is detected, the cable owner or operator has to notify the relevant coastal states and apply for the permits that allow a repair vessel to operate in their waters. Those permits can take days to weeks to obtain. Different countries have different processes. A cable crossing multiple exclusive economic zones has to clear multiple bureaucracies before the repair can begin. Then comes vessel mobilization, crew readiness, loading the right equipment, and working through the permitting process can take days or weeks. It's not a failure of the system. It's the realistic timeline for an operation that requires specialized vessels and regulatory coordination across international waters. Once the ship is moving, transit to the repair site can take days or weeks. A cable fault in the middle of the Pacific is a long sail from the nearest cable ship in port. Then the repair itself, grappling for the cable on the seabed, bringing it to the surface, splicing the break, relaying the repaired section. On site, the physical work typically takes several more days, faster in shallow water than in deep. Added up. From the moment a fault is detected to the moment traffic is flowing through a repaired cable again, you're realistically talking about weeks, not days. The United States has a dedicated repair capacity, the Cable Security Fleet. Exactly 2 privately owned U.S.-flagged cable vessels held under operating agreements with the Maritime Administration, MARAD, under federal statute. 2 ships for the world's largest concentration of cable landings. They exist because no commercial cable operator maintains its own fleet at that scale, and the federal government decided a guaranteed U.S.-flagged repair capacity mattered to national security. 2 ships is not unlimited capacity, but it's more than many countries have. In late February 2024, 3 cable systems in the Red Sea corridor, CECOM/TGN-EA, EIG, and AAE-1, were damaged in quick succession. A leading, widely reported explanation linked the damage to anchor drag from a vessel called the MV Rubimar. The Rubimar had been disabled by a Houthi missile strike in the Red Sea and left drifting, its anchor dragging across the seabed. The causal chain, missile strike to drifting ship to dragging anchor to cable damage, has not been conclusively established by an official investigation with a publicly available finding. What's documented is the damage. 3 cables down in one of the world's most critical submarine corridors. The response is what makes the Red Sea case instructive. As we covered in the redundancy beat, 11 of roughly 14 cables in that corridor kept running. Traffic rerouted. The internet did not break. Users in affected regions saw higher latency and, in some cases, slower connections. Network engineers watching traffic patterns saw a visible shift, but the fundamental connectivity held. The Red Sea shows what redundancy looks like at corridor scale, under real pressure. Now compare it to a place where redundancy essentially didn't exist. The Matsu Islands are a small Taiwanese territory in the Taiwan Strait, a cluster of islands about 13,000 people call home, sitting about 200 kilometers from the Taiwanese mainland. In February 2023, both of the submarine cables serving Matsu were severed within days of each other. The first was cut by a fishing boat on February 2nd. The second was cut by a cargo ship's anchor on February 8th. 13,000 people, 2 cables, both gone within a week. Matsu fell back on a microwave backup link, a radio relay with a fraction of the bandwidth residents had before. Internet that had been normal became slow and rationed. For roughly 50 days, that was what connectivity looked like for everyone on those islands. The cables have been damaged approximately 30 times since 2017, and Taiwan has no domestic cable repair vessel of its own. That's the contrast. The United States has diverse landing points across both coasts and a 2-vessel repair fleet under federal statute. Matsu had 2 cables and had to wait for a foreign repair ship. Both are real. One is a function of scale and investment. The other is a function of geography and the limits of a small island's infrastructure. Let's walk through what different failure scenarios actually look like, as scenarios, not predictions. 1 cable fault. A single cable somewhere off the US coast develops a fault. Fishing gear, an anchor, a seismic event. Traffic reroutes automatically across the remaining cables in that corridor. For the vast majority of users, nothing happens. No slowdown, no notification, no outage. The system does what it was designed to do. Several cables in one corridor. This is closer to what happened in the Red Sea. Capacity in that corridor tightens. Latency on routes that depended heavily on those cables may increase. Some services that rely on low-latency connections might notice. But traffic continues to flow via alternative paths around the other coast through different ocean basins. What you get is degraded service, not a shutoff. A landing station cluster. US cable landings are spread across both coasts, but they're not uniformly distributed. A few locations handle higher concentrations. A scenario affecting a cluster of landing stations in one area, through physical damage, weather, or infrastructure failure, tests the geographic diversity argument directly. Traffic could redistribute to landings elsewhere. Regional effects, particularly for services with no alternative routing, are possible. The diverse landing points' strength is real, but it has limits. Regional degraded service. This is probably the realistic worst case for a single major incident affecting US connectivity. Not a blackout, but a sustained period of slower, less reliable intercontinental connections for part of the country, while traffic redistributes and the repair timeline from beat 6 plays out. Weeks, not days, of impaired but not absent connectivity. Realistic US-wide resilience. For a true nationwide intercontinental outage from cable damage alone, you would need to incapacitate a very large number of geographically diverse landing points simultaneously. Landings on both coasts, connected to different backbone networks, make that scenario highly unlikely from any single incident or corridor failure. This is the one cut from darkness myth. It doesn't hold up against the actual architecture. None of these scenarios are inevitable. None of them are predictions. They're a map of the territory, what the system looks like under different kinds of pressure, based on what the architecture and the incident record actually tell us. The next time you send a message to someone in Europe, or transfer money to an account in Asia, or watch a live broadcast from somewhere on the other side of the world, it's traveling through a glass fiber on the floor of the ocean. It may be passing through the Atlantic at that moment, or the Pacific, or the Indian Ocean. It's moving through a cable laid by a ship that took months to complete the route. It's being amplified by repeaters powered by copper conductors wrapped around the glass. It's arriving at a nondescript building on a coastline somewhere, handed off to a land network, and reaching you. The system is resilient, not because nothing goes wrong. Things go wrong 150 to 200 times a year. But because enough cables run through enough diverse routes to enough diverse landing points that a single fault rarely translates into something you'd notice. And when bigger problems do occur, cable ships go out, permits get filed, crews do the work, and eventually the splice is made and the cable is relayed. That resilience isn't a natural condition. It's an outcome, the product of route diversity, of landing station geography, of repair capacity, of the licensing and national security frameworks that govern which cables can come ashore and who can own them. Those are real variables. They can be invested in or not. The network's margin for error is not fixed. It's a choice that gets made continuously in how much capacity and repair infrastructure and route diversity we maintain. For now, the cables hold, and the world's data keeps moving.